Well, good evening to you. I am Dr. John Mott-Smith, and I served Hawaii as their first permanent resident dentist. Now, don't be alarmed. I understand that people of this century don't care much for men of my trade. Seem to think we're in the pain business. Well, just be glad you weren't visiting a dentist back in 1851. Come to think of it, I haven't practiced dentistry in many years. Well, I got so caught up in the politics of these wonderful islands that I practically forgot the reason I came here. I hopped off a clipper ship in 1851 into the sleeping village of Honolulu with a box full of instruments, ready to ply my trade in dentistry, and died years later, having served as Hawaii's Minister of Finance, Minister of the Interior, and Minister Plenipotentiary to the United States. Now, how did a dentist rise to such soaring political heights, you may ask? Well, it's a long story, and you'll have to bear with me. Where shall I start? Well, I suppose the beginning would be appropriate. I was born a Yankee boy in New York City in 1824. Now, my parents were relatively wealthy, and by the time I was 18, I was training to be a jeweler on the East Coast. Now, a dear college friend of mine, he was also interested in the manipulation of gold, as I was, but for a different reason. See, he was training to be a dentist, and gold was the choice for fillings at the time. Oh, I would listen to him complain about his studies long into the night, and one day I decided to pick up his textbook just to see what all the fuss was about. And not only did I find that book much more understandable than my poor friend, I also found it fascinating. From what I learned from that book, I learned enough to be accepted into a prominent dental college. In 1845, I started my own successful practice in Albany. My interest in gold did not end in jewelry and dentistry, however. When news reached my ears of the California gold rush, I locked the doors of my Albany dental practice forever and joined a rowdy group of men on the long journey west. While I was in California, I heard many men speaking of the plentiful business opportunities to be had across the sea in the Sandwich Islands. So, when I grew tired of panning for gold, I hopped on a ship, arrived in Honolulu in 1851, and opened up my new dental practice on Beretania Street. I was to become Hawaii's first resident dentist. Now, dentistry in the islands was a strange proposition. Many of the locals had their own traditional dental practices. You see, for cleaning, they would rub wood ash or charcoal on and around between their teeth, rinse their mouths. For toothache, they would treat it by biting down on the root of the puakala, or the native Hawaiian poppy, for an extended period of time. As I began to treat more and more patients, I became acquainted with the practice of deliberately knocking out one's incisor teeth as an expression of grief over the loss of a chief or a loved one. Now, naturally, this practice led to serious infection. I also encountered a great number of cavities and gum disease as a result of having never had the luxury of visiting a proper dentist before. Now, this is not to say that nobody had attempted to practice dentistry in the islands prior to my arrival. Protestant missionaries had implemented primitive surgical practices as early as their arrival in 1820. I understand that the Reverend Hiram Bingham was kept busy on a daily basis with the tooth extractions, bloodlettings, the administration of medicine of all kinds. Now, these missionary dentists, they would employ a tool that we affectionately referred to as the friend in need for performing tooth extractions. Now, this was a metal T-shaped device, roughly 6 inches in length, with a handle, and it ended in a fairly alarming hook. Luckily for the islanders, I had brought with me the most advanced in medical machinery, including toothbrushes and toothpaste. But more importantly, I merely impressed upon the islanders the value of their teeth and the importance of frequent and continued care. As the only resident dentist in the islands, I was tasked with the treatment of each and every citizen, and this included the royal family. But I'll never forget the time that Queen Emma, the wife of King Kamehameha IV, first walked into my office and sat in my dental chair. She came in for a simple cleaning, but she had brought with her her entire envoy, including a number of guards. They were fairly imposing, but stood in the corner and watched carefully every move that I made. I remember vividly picking up a simple tooth scraper and bringing it towards the Queen's mouth. A sudden hush fell over the room, and I could feel muscles tensing and fists curling, and the Queen reached out and touched the point of the device and assured everyone that I would not harm her. But it wasn't until a great peal of laughter broke out over the room at the sight of the Queen spitting her rinse water into a spittoon bucket that I was finally able to relax. These are good people. They love their king and queen. The monarchy provides for them and treats them well. Now, I proved myself to be affable, intelligent, skilled professional, and as such I attracted the interest of many people in the islands. I served as a trusted advisor to King Kamehameha IV, and was briefly elected to the House of Representatives in 1853. But I soon achieved more prestigious posts, including a seat on the King's Privy Council and the director of the government press. But I truly showed my potential when, in 1867, I was elected president pro tempore of a committee tasked with considering a reciprocity treaty with the United States. Now, when this treaty was finally passed 9 years later, it opened the United States market to Hawaiian trade goods, particularly the growing sugar industry, in exchange for American usage of Hawaiian lands. Now, it's no secret that I invested heavily in Hawaiian sugar plantations and stood to gain greatly from this treaty, but it did wonders to stabilize and stimulate the Hawaiian economy. Unfortunately, it sowed the seeds for disaster later in the Hawaiian kingdom, unbeknownst to us. For my success, I was awarded government posts under 3 Hawaiian kings and 1 queen. I served in the Hawaiian House of Nobles. I served as the Minister of Finance on several occasions, the President of the Board of Education, Charge d'Affaires in Washington, and eventually Minister of the Interior in 1870. And it was in that year that I was given what some consider to be my most important and difficult task. I oversaw the construction of Hawaii's first luxury hotel, which helped to give rise to the incredibly profitable Hawaiian tourism industry. In 1879, I had grown weary of public office and had elected to leave the islands for the sake of my growing family. Now, 20 years earlier, I had married Miss Ellen Dominus Patey, and together we had raised 7 children. They were growing so fast, and they deserved only the best education. It was with a heavy heart that I left the islands, but I was proud of my accomplishments here, and I would return periodically to serve in sessions of the House of Nobles. Even in the streets of Boston, when people discussed Hawaii, there was but one topic that rose to the surface each and every time. It was annexation. American residents living in Hawaii thought that annexation might stabilize the ever-precarious Hawaiian economy. The Navy, of course, was hungry for the opportunity to establish a crucial way station between East and West that they've so long dreamed of. And there were those among the American citizenry who wanted a sense of security that these alien people, these Hawaiians, had been brought safely into the fold. It was in 1882 that King David Kalakaua had appointed me special commissioner to renew the Reciprocity Treaty, which had done so well for the Hawaiian economy. And it was with great pride that in 1887, my colleagues and I finally succeeded in passing the second Reciprocity Treaty, guaranteeing the Hawaiian economic security for years to come. Now, this does not come without loud and insistent opposition among some of the islanders. You see, in exchange for the United States agreeing to renew the Reciprocity Treaty for another 7 years, they insisted that the Hawaiian government grant them exclusive rights to use Pearl Harbor as a naval facility for the duration of the contract. This was widely unpopular, but what were we to do? Hawaiian economic security depended on the renewal of that contract. So we agreed. I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised. Later that year, I received a letter while in Boston. King David Kalakaua had passed away. And the new monarch, his sister, Queen Liliuokalani, needed my help in renegotiating a third Reciprocity Treaty. See, the second one had been virtually negated by the passage of the McKinley Tariff in 1890, which removed virtually all of the advantages that the Hawaiians had gained for the sugar industry by removing the tariffs, virtually removing all of it. This caused a great depression in the Hawaiian Islands. People were suffering. So in 1892, Queen Liliuokalani named me envoy extraordinaire and minister plenipotentiary to the United States to arrange for a third Reciprocity Treaty. I was in Hawaii, and I was due to leave for Washington later that year when I received a disturbing invitation. I was asked to meet at a secret location in the dead of night, no less, with a group of prominent American businessmen and politicians, some of the best that Hawaii had to offer. Rumors had been circulating about an overthrow, and I had no doubt that these men were somehow involved. If we were caught at such a meeting, we could be tried for treason and executed. But this was my final opportunity to persuade these men to drive this folly from their heads. I arrived in the small building on Merchant Street and was permitted entrance into a back room full of men, all of whom raised their heads as I entered. I knew most of their faces. Many had become my friends during my time in the islands. But annexation is an issue that can drive a wedge between friends. I took my seat, and Mr. Loren Thurston began. Thurston is a prominent American businessman. You may have heard of him. He became the unofficial spokesman of the annexation movement in Honolulu. He explained that the purpose of this meeting was to discuss the divisiveness between the island's different factions, the damage done to the economy through the McKinley tariff, and the potential for political violence. Now, he insisted that the only solution to these problems was annexation, and that could be achieved by only one of two means, either through slow action in the legislature or by force. Many, unfortunately, favored the latter. When it came my turn to speak, I stood and I said what I'd always believed. Gentlemen, I began, the situation is not good. You are correct. However, what you call for is illegal, and I cannot condone it. We must accept with humility that we are but a part of the grand strategy, a new manifest destiny for the United States. We are important, yes, but the United States is after far, far more than merely acquiring a new territory. These islands are special. There's nowhere in the world quite like them. Their people are hardworking, honest, eager, and kind. Let us instead pursue free trade between the Sandwich Islands and the United States, and there will be no further disputes. Hawaii maintains a friendly disposition with its neighbor country, but it has earned the right to remain independent. Wait, gentlemen. I implore you. I'd said all I had to say, and I left. Of course, you know what happened next. I'm afraid my powers of persuasion were woefully insufficient. Task at hand. In 1893, while I was away on the Queen's business, Americans in Honolulu overthrew the Hawaiian monarchy. When annexation was not immediately achieved, instituted a republic. I was immediately recalled to the islands, whereupon I was informed that my services and Mr. Plenipotentiary were no longer required. Mr. Loren Thurston would be taking my role. I was 70 years old, and I was in no condition to take any dramatic action. So I quietly accepted the nation's fate, faded into the obscurity of retirement. My final years in the islands were pleasant. I finally had time. Time to walk the streets, exchange greetings with old friends. Time to admire the natural beauty of these wonderful islands. Time to spend with my beloved family. But my time, as is always the case, eventually ran out. I passed away on August the 10th, 1895, after an extended illness. I saw so much change during my time in the islands. I traveled first on a clipper ship, and then by rail across the United States, and then by steamship. I saw buildings rise and tourism blossom. I saw children grow, and I saw a kingdom fall. My American friends would often ask me what I was given in exchange for my services to the Hawaiians. A man has only one lifetime to live. And he must choose carefully what to do with the time that he is given to him. The Hawaiians gave me the honor of practicing my dentistry. They gave me the honor of mingling with royalty. They gave me the honor of enacting political change. I suppose you could say that the Hawaiians gave me 1,000 lifetimes. Good evening to you, my friends.
Good evening.